Cora Bennett's phone buzzed just as she rushed down the worn steps of the Fulton Street subway station, the clack of her heels sharp against the tile. She glanced at the screen. The subject line on the email read, "Urgent wrong placement at Willow Glen." Her stomach dropped. At 28, Cora was juggling more than she could handle. As a newly appointed community liaison for Haven Rise, a nonprofit focused on placing vulnerable youth into therapeutic arts programs, she was already stretched thin. Her latest case was Juniper Hale, a quiet 12-year-old who had recently entered the system after a tragic house fire. Cora had arranged for Juniper to start at Monarch Academy, a highly structured top-tier program in Upper Manhattan. Or so she thought. According to the email, Juniper had just spent her first day at Willow Glen, a small public campus in Brooklyn, an alternative school with no uniforms, no formal grading, and a reputation for being soft on academics. Cora muttered under her breath. Monarch was clinical proven and safe. Willow Glen was unpredictable. She pulled up the file again. Sure enough, she had submitted the wrong placement code. She had mixed up the last 2 digits. Her mistake. By the time Cora arrived at Willow Glen, the school day had ended. Students filtered out the front doors in 2s and 3s, some laughing, some dragging backpacks behind them, a few skateboarding down the sidewalk. The building itself was unimpressive. A converted YMCA with faded bricks and a bright mural of a phoenix stretched across the entrance wall. Inside, the hallways smelled faintly of crayons and dust. A friendly office assistant pointed her toward room 207. Cora walked slowly down the corridor, unsure what to expect. She paused at the door and glanced through the small glass window. Inside, a group of students sat in a loose circle on mismatched cushions. In the center sat a young woman with a soft presence, her hair in a messy bun, a long sweater slipping from one shoulder, jeans faded at the knees. She wasn't leading the conversation. She was listening. A boy, maybe 10, spoke about his mom being in the hospital. Another child said they hadn't slept in days. The teacher nodded gently, never interrupting, never correcting. Her voice, when it came, was low and calm. "You don't need to fix everything," she said. "Sometimes, just showing up is the most powerful thing we can do." Cora stood frozen. Juniper was sitting near the edge of the group, her body relaxed, a colored pencil turning slowly in her hand. She wasn't withdrawn. She wasn't distressed. She was drawing soft circles on the edge of her paper, completely at ease. It was the first time Cora had seen Juniper look at peace. After the last of the students had wandered out, Cora stepped quietly into the room. The teacher was stacking books and humming softly to herself. She looked up and smiled. "You must be with Haven Rise," she said. "I'm Avery Lane." Cora introduced herself and wasted no time. "I'm so sorry," she said, breathless. "Juniper wasn't supposed to be placed here. There was an error with the district form. She was meant to start at Monarch Academy." Avery nodded, unfazed. "Monarch," she repeated with a small smile. "That's the one with glass walls and $10 lunches, right?" Cora managed a guilty laugh. "That sounds about right." Avery didn't respond with frustration or defensiveness. Instead, she said, "Mistakes brought half the kids in this room to me. Maybe they're not always the worst thing." There was something in her tone, gentle but steady, as if she had learned not to panic when things didn't go as planned. They spoke for 10 minutes, then 30. Cora learned that Avery wasn't a certified therapist. She had once been a poetry fellow, then a crisis line volunteer, and later a grief facilitator for teens. Her younger sister had died in a car crash when Avery was 23. Since then, she had devoted her life to building classrooms that felt like safe places instead of performance spaces. She showed Cora a wall where students pinned small tokens with hand-drawn faces on them. Each token had a word: angry, numb, tender, hopeful. "We call it the mood pantry," Avery said. "They pick one each morning. It's easier to talk when you already have a word to start with." Cora looked around the room again, noticing the soft lighting, the watercolor posters, the beanbags tucked into reading corners. It didn't look like a classroom. It looked like a home. Juniper Hale had not spoken a single word since the night of the fire. 6 months of silence. No responses to questions. No cries. Not even a whisper. When Cora first met her, Juniper communicated through nods, shrugs, and the occasional drawing. Therapists said it was trauma-induced mutism. Foster homes described her as distant. Some labeled her unreachable. But something shifted at Willow Glen. On her third day in room 207, Juniper moved her token from numb to tender. On the 5th day, she stayed after class to help wipe down the tables without being asked. On the 8th, she tore a page from her sketch pad and handed it to a crying classmate. It was a simple drawing of a house with no roof, but sunlight pouring in from above. Then, at the end of the 3rd week, something unimaginable happened. She spoke. It was during a circle time prompt when another student mentioned missing the smell of their grandmother's pancakes. Juniper looked down at the colored pencil in her hand, then up at the room. "I remember the smell of cinnamon toast," she said softly. A single sentence. No one interrupted. No one reacted too loudly. But Cora, standing just outside the door, had to step into the hallway and press her hand to her chest. Her eyes burned, her throat tightened, because that one sentence was everything. It meant she was still in there. Cora began visiting Willow Glen more often. At first, it was under the guise of monitoring the case. She told herself it was her professional responsibility to ensure Juniper's emotional progress. But deep down, she knew it was something else. It was the way Juniper's shoulders had relaxed. It was the way the classroom felt like breathing room instead of a checklist. And it was the way Avery Lane made silence feel safe. Avery wasn't trying to be impressive. She didn't quote research or flaunt credentials. She didn't push anyone to talk. She just stayed. During slow afternoons in the teacher's lounge, she and Cora began sharing cups of peppermint tea. Their conversations drifted from student stories to childhood music, from grief to hope. Cora told her about her older sister Emily, who died when Cora was 16, about how her family stopped talking after that, how no one knew what to do with sadness except pretend it wasn't there. Avery listened without flinching. She didn't fill the silences. She just nodded and said, "I know that kind of quiet." It wasn't romantic, not exactly, but it was intimate in a way Cora hadn't felt in years. Each visit felt less like a case and more like a return. On a Thursday afternoon, just as the sky over Brooklyn began to darken with clouds, Cora's phone rang. It was her supervisor from Haven Rise. "We've got a spot open at Monarch Academy," he said briskly. "Effective Monday. I need you to initiate the transfer." Cora hesitated. "Juniper is finally stable here." "Willow Glen was a temporary mistake," he replied. "You know Monarch is the gold standard. She'll get the structure and clinical oversight we originally planned for." "But what if structure isn't what she needs?" Cora's voice was quiet. "What if the mistake is the only thing that's worked?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "You have until Monday to complete the paperwork." Click. Cora sat frozen on the steps outside Willow Glen, her phone still pressed to her ear long after the call ended. The timing couldn't have been worse. Juniper had started speaking. She was drawing again. She had even laughed during art time that morning. Cora stared at the brick walls of the school and wondered how many times in her life she had chosen what looked right instead of what felt right. This time she wasn't sure she could. That Friday, Avery introduced a new class ritual called Letters to the Unseen. She set a small wooden box on the windowsill just below a handmade sign that read, "Write to someone you miss. No grades, no judgment, just honesty." Some of the students looked unsure. Others jumped in right away. Crayons, pencils, and stickers filled the tables. Most letters were addressed to pets, grandparents, or siblings who had passed. Juniper didn't move at first. She sat at the corner of the room, sketchpad, closed eyes fixed on the rain sliding down the window. But when the final bell rang and the other students had packed their bags, she stayed behind. She approached Avery slowly, holding a folded piece of notebook paper. "Can you read it?" she asked. Avery took the paper, carefully nodding. She sat down on the floor beside Juniper and unfolded the letter. Inside, in uneven handwriting, were the words, "Dear Leo, I miss when you made pancakes and sang the dumb ukulele song. I tried to draw the stars again, but I forgot how. Today I made a new friend. She doesn't fix me. She just lets me be. And that feels like pancakes. Love, Junie." Avery read it aloud, her voice steady until the very last line. Then she closed her eyes, holding the letter to her chest like something sacred. That night, Cora read it too. She didn't make it halfway through before the tears came. Not because the letter was perfect, but because it was real. Sunday night. Cora sat at her kitchen table, the apartment lit only by the glow of her laptop screen. The official transfer forms for Juniper were open in front of her. All she had to do was click Submit. One click and Juniper would leave Willow Glen. One click and everything would go back to the plan. Her finger hovered over the trackpad. She stared at the document, at the language, at the emptiness of it. Then she closed the tab. Instead, she opened a blank page and began typing. It wasn't a transfer form. It was a letter. Not just to her supervisor, but to the board, to anyone who would listen. She wrote about Juniper's silence and how it had broken in room 207. She wrote about Avery Lane, about how she had created something extraordinary out of beanbags and crayons and listening. She described the letter to Leo. The pancakes, the stars, the feeling of being allowed to be. She called the document The Art of Being Seen. And when she finally hit send, the clock read 2:14 a.m. Cora leaned back in her chair, hands shaking slightly. For the first time in months, she didn't feel like she was managing a case. She felt like she was protecting something sacred. Monday morning began like any other, until a silver Lexus pulled up in front of Willow Glen, and a woman stepped out in heels, a pearl necklace, and an expression carved in disapproval. Her name was Cynthia Hale, Juniper's temporary guardian, assigned by the state after multiple placements failed. She marched into the front office without waiting for permission, announcing to the receptionist, "I'm here to assess the school that has clearly failed this child." Cora arrived seconds later, breathless and tense. By the time she reached room 207, Cynthia was already inside, arms crossed, gaze sharp. Avery was kneeling beside a student at the back of the room, helping tape up a drawing of a bird with one wing mended. "Excuse me," Cynthia snapped. "Are you the one running this daycare?" Avery stood slowly. "I'm Juniper's teacher." "Teacher," Cynthia echoed. "You're not licensed. You have no therapeutic authority. And you let children write letters to ghosts." Avery's face didn't flinch. "We let them feel." Juniper stood near the reading corner, silent, a folded paper heart clutched in her palm. She needs real help, Cynthia said. Not coddling. Then Juniper did something no one expected. She stepped forward. I want to stay here, she said, voice small but clear. Cynthia scoffed. You're 12. You don't get to decide. She listens to me, Juniper said, nodding toward Avery. And I feel safe here. Then Cora entered the room. Juniper isn't going anywhere, she said firmly. Cynthia turned. You work for the placement agency. Not anymore, Cora replied. As of this morning, I resigned, and Juniper's file has been reassigned. Cynthia sputtered with disbelief. But she had no legal power beyond what the state had granted her, and the state, thanks to Cora's letter, had started to listen. Avery looked at Cora then. Their eyes met, filled with gratitude, surprise, and something more. Something just beginning. A month had passed. The weather had softened. The trees outside Willow Glen had started to bloom with pink blossoms that stuck to the sidewalks like tiny petals of possibility. Inside, the rhythms of room 207 continued. The circle times, the art therapy, the quiet moments and the loud ones. Juniper now sat closer to the center. She spoke more often. She smiled. Cora had left Haven Rise for good. She had taken a pay cut, moved into a small walk-up apartment in Brooklyn, and accepted a new position at Willow Glen Trauma Support Coordinator. A title that meant a little bit of everything and a lot of heart. She spent her mornings floating between classrooms, helping students name emotions, redirect anger, or simply sit in stillness. In the afternoons, she often found herself back in room 207, sometimes helping, sometimes just watching. Avery was still. Avery, soft-spoken, messy-haired cardigan, sleeves smudged with paint. But now her smile lingered longer when Cora entered a room. One quiet Thursday evening, after the students had gone home, they sat on the school roof with 2 chipped mugs of tea between them. The city stretched out around them, humming and alive. I never expected this, Cora said, eyes on the horizon. Me neither, Avery replied. They didn't rush anything. Cora reached out, almost uncertain, and Avery, without hesitation, laced her fingers through. They didn't call it anything yet. They didn't need to. The mistake had never really been the school form. The real mistake was thinking that healing looked like progress reports and neatly defined goals. The real mistake was thinking grief could be fixed, like a leaky pipe, quickly, efficiently, without mess. Cora had spent most of her adult life managing other people's pain. She had kept her own locked behind emails, appointment schedules, and perfectly written intake reports. She had believed that professionalism meant distance, that order could replace feeling. But Avery had shown her something different. Avery didn't organize grief. She sat beside it. She didn't ask children to be strong. She asked them to be real. She didn't use words like intervention or outcome. She used crayons, music, silence. And in doing so, she reminded Cora of something she hadn't dared believe in for years, that the things we think disqualify us from love are often the very things that make us ready for it. Juniper had found her voice not through therapy scripts, but through kindness that expected nothing in return. Cora had found her calling not by climbing higher, but by stepping closer. And together they had all discovered that sometimes the best things in life aren't the ones we chase. They're the ones we nearly overlook, the ones that arrive quietly, by mistake. On a soft spring morning, the playground at Willow Glen buzzed with laughter, folding chairs, and camera clicks. It was 5th grade graduation. Parents lined the schoolyard with phones in hand. Teachers adjusted caps made of cardboard and yarn. Someone passed out cookies on napkins. Juniper stood near the front, hair tied back with a ribbon, her hands holding a paper she had folded and unfolded at least a dozen times. Cora and Avery sat side by side in the second row. Avery's hand found Cora's knee beneath the folding chair. Juniper stepped up to the microphone. Her voice was steady, but quiet. "When I first came to Willow Glen, I didn't talk," she said. "I didn't laugh. I didn't know how to feel anything but sad." The crowd stilled. "I lost my brother, and for a long time I thought I lost myself too. But then I met someone who didn't ask me to be okay. She just sat with me until I could breathe again." Avery pressed her lips together, eyes glassy. "She gave me crayons and time and music, and a mailbox for letters that didn't need answers." Juniper took a breath. "And then I met someone else. Someone who protected me when I couldn't speak, who stood up for me when I was too small to be loud. She helped me stay." She looked at Cora. "Today I want to say thank you. Not just for staying, but for seeing me." Then she turned to Avery. "And today I want to call her what she already is in my heart." She paused. "My mom." Avery's hand flew to her mouth. The entire yard erupted in quiet, stunned tears. Even the principal wiped his eyes. Behind them, one of the school custodians whispered, "That's the real kind of graduation." Later that evening, after the streamers were down and the lawn had emptied, Cora, Avery, and Juniper walked slowly through the hallways of Willow Glen one last time before summer. Juniper pointed to the drawing wall, where her first sketch still hung stars and cinnamon toast. Outside, the sunset stretched over Brooklyn in soft gold and pink. They stepped into the grass barefoot. Juniper skipped ahead, laughing. Cora looked over at Avery. "You think this was all just luck?" she asked softly. Avery smiled. "No, I think it was a mistake that saved us." They walked home together. Not perfect, but whole.